The purpose of this chapter is to explore the place of research in social work and advocate that our practices be based on quality research findings that are derived from the scientific method. As a social work profession, we are required to be accountable to society and must be able to answer three basic accountability questions. How do our clients know that we can help them? How does our profession know that we have helped our clients? How do the funding bodies that fund our programs know how effectively their dollars are being spent? It is the position of both the Council of Social Work Education, or CSWE, and the National Association of Social Workers, or NASW, to hold all social workers and social work agencies accountable. The websites listed below will help you find more information about CSWE and NASW. There are 5 ways that we acquire knowledge: through tradition, experience, authority, beliefs, and intuition, and the scientific method. Over the next several slides, we'll be covering each of the ways of acquiring knowledge more specifically. However, the most important one, which will be discussed primarily in this chapter, is the scientific method. Authority, knowledge that is passed down from experts or authority figures, such as teachers, scientists, or expert practitioners in the field that is known to be true. It is important to be open to questioning the accuracy of authority figures. Be skeptical of media as a source of evidence. One of the first ways that we learn comes from someone in an authoritative position. However, experts can be wrong. For example, it was once believed by researchers that a child with schizophrenia was caused by bad parenting. More recent evidence indicates that schizophrenia is largely caused by genetic and biological factors. So it's important to be careful when taking information at face value without verifying the source. The next way we acquire knowledge is through tradition, or knowledge that is passed down through tradition, sometimes based on dictates of authority. It's the accepted way of doing things, or the way that things have always been done. Tradition differentiates between knowledge, which is based on facts, and belief, which is based on faith. Except that both are neither final nor certain. Authority and tradition are highly related to each other. You typically acquire knowledge from family members, specifically from the head of household, such as your mother or father. And your mother and father acquired this knowledge from the head of their household, which was passed down generation to generation. We tend not to question these beliefs and accept them as our own. As a practicing or practitioner or social worker, you may often be provided suggestions or professional opinions from those who have spent many years in the field. The way that things have been done in the past may not always be best practice. It is good practice to connect the knowledge given to you by your colleagues with current literature. Tradition is important because it helps us learn from our mistakes, but also helps to build upon our achievements. Intuition is the natural ability or power that makes it possible to know something without proof or evidence. Intuition can guide a person to act a certain way without fully understanding why. However, there are many ethical concerns that outline why we should never solely rely on our intuition when working with clients. Intuition and reality do not always match. Intuitive judgments may lead to superstitious behaviors. Intuitive judgments vary dramatically, and intuition is susceptible to bias. For example, if you went to your doctor and he told you that he had a hunch you may have a certain disorder, and then prescribe medication without confirming his hunch, this would be unethical. You have a moral obligation to locate prior research and use the results to provide best practices for all your clients. The fifth and final way of knowing is the scientific method, which is the main focus of this class. The scientific method is a way of knowing that is based on observable and measurable facts, objectivity. The scientific method is a problem-solving process, or research method or research process. The first step in the scientific method is observing or measuring something. The second phase is making an assumption based on the observations. The third phase is testing our assumptions, and the final phase is revising our assumptions based on our findings. The scientific method is a way of knowing that's based on observable or measurable facts. The process of using the scientific method helps make a research study more easily verifiable and replicated by others. Before we talk about the steps of the scientific method, let's first look at the characteristics of a researcher. When researchers use the scientific method to generate knowledge, they must possess the 4 characteristics. Be aware of your own values, being skeptical, always sharing your findings with others, and being honest. You must be unbiased and impartial to the highest degree possible. This means you should put aside your personal values when conducting and evaluating research. Skeptical curiosity means that all findings derived from the scientific method must not be the truth because new evidence can be found and change what we know. Sharing your findings is also critical to improving our profession and validating our results. Finally, being honest in the results that you do for both your successes and your failures. Being honest also requires the researcher to share their values and ideas and how those may impact the findings. As mentioned previously, these are the phases of the scientific method. First phase, observing and measuring something about a person, an object, or event. In phase 2, we then make an assumption on the basis of those observations and our measurements. In school, you're often told this is your hypothesis. In phase 3, we test that assumption or hypothesis to the extent of what it is true. And finally, in phase 4, we may revise that assumption or hypothesis based on the results of the test, and then start over again in phase 2. Nothing is forever, according to the research method. Research can only add knowledge to things that exist in the sense that they can be observed or measured. Knowledge is neither certain nor absolute. What we know today can change tomorrow. And that's why you take a research methods class, so you can continue to add to the knowledge that we know in social work. Things that you find today may affect what students learn tomorrow. In order to fully understand the scientific inquiry process, we're going to use an example of children's social skills and attachment to their mothers as we cover each of the 4 phases. The first phase within the scientific method is observing or measuring something about a person, object, or event. The example in the text described an interest in determining whether the strength of a child's attachment to his or her mother affects their social skills. In the first phase, you first need to define your terms. More specifically, the word attachment needs to be defined. What does this look like? How is it measured? After defining this term, you can more easily observe this type of behavior. In the second phase, you might formulate an assumption or a hypothesis based on the observations you made. For example, you might assume or hypothesize the stronger the attachment a child has to his or her mother, the higher the child's social skills will be. This is also an example of what we call inductive logic, because you began with an observation and used the same information to make a general statement about attachment and its relationship to social skills. In the third phase, you'll begin to test your assumptions. In this phase, you will collect data as it relates to your hypothesis. This may consist of evaluating attachment levels and social skills from children of many diverse backgrounds. The final phase allows the researcher to compare their assumption with the results and make any changes necessary. Once the research is published, other researchers interested in attachment will examine your assumption and combine your information to support their own findings. Therefore, the processes involved in the scientific method allow for replication of results. In this case, the researcher was able to determine the higher the attachment the child has to their mother, the more developed their social skills will be. What is the purpose of social work research? Social work research is a systematic and objective inquiry that uses the scientific method to solve human problems and create new knowledge that is generally applicable to the social work profession. There are 4 different types of social work reasons why we do social work research: an exploration, a description, an evaluation, and an explanation. Each of these will be discussed in the next chapter. As we progress through this class, we'll begin to talk about 2 specific approaches to the scientific method: the quantitative approach and the qualitative approach. The quantitative approach is measured in quantity or amount. Typically, we use data. And a qualitative approach is measured in quality or kind of data, usually from interviews. Each of these will be discussed in more depth in these later chapters. This diagram outlines the quantitative approach. You can go through the steps to identify the processes involved in a quantitative research approach. This will be covered in more depth in Chapter 5. This slide outlines the qualitative approach. You can compare the qualitative approach to the quantitative approach, but each of these phases and this method will be further discussed in Chapter 6. Research studies can be classified into pure or applied. Pure research studies are ones that are driven by the researcher's interest, and the goal of your research is to develop theory and expand social work knowledge base. This tends to produce theoretical results. Theories are able to explain or predict or understand phenomena that may occur in the real world. An example of a pure research study would be a social worker with a sociological background who may be interested in the patterns that evolve in a social system when there's a threat. How do people behave when there's a threat? The goal of applied research studies is to develop solutions for problems and application in practice. These produce practical results. Applied research tends to be descriptive rather than exploratory and can be based upon pure research, like finding better ways to help agencies understand what to do when there's a threat. As mentioned previously, the definition of social work research is a systematic and objective inquiry that utilizes the scientific method to solve human problems and create new knowledge that is generally applicable to the social work profession. Because much of our knowledge base is based on other professions and other areas of study, it is important that as social workers we use the scientific method to further the knowledge base of the social work profession. Social work practice and research and problem-solving processes can be observed in Figure 1.9. By looking at the 4 phases, and for example, defining a problem, determining the solution, implementation, and evaluation can be compared by looking at general problem-solving, social work research, and social work practice. Both social work practitioners and social work researchers base their conclusions on careful observations, systematic trials, and critical analysis in social work research. In social work practice, we use evidence-based information. Evidence-based practice means information published within journals or by other researchers. We use this information to drive our research and make its application to our clients. In social work research and social work practice, we use evidence-based information. Evidence-based means we use information published by any journals to drive decisions that we make about our research and its application to potential clients. Social workers must strive to use evidence-based practices whenever possible. This is an example of evidence-based practice for choosing a potential intervention for a possible client. First, we formulate a practice-based question. We then search for evidence. We evaluate the quality of the evidence. We identify any intervention options. We choose an intervention. We monitor the intervention and evaluate the outcomes. This helps us make a decision on whether the intervention is working for our client or if we need to make a change. This slide describes research roles and the reasons behind why social workers need to use findings of the scientific method. As a research consumer, the creator and disseminator of knowledge, the contributing partner, and integrating all 3 research roles. As a research consumer, it is your role to consume as much information pertaining to your interest as possible. As a creator and disseminator of knowledge, it is your role to always be open to identifying new areas within our profession for evaluating and further clarification. As a contributing partner, the more you know about a profession, the more you know about the scientific method, the more you'll be able to add relevant information that can be used by all practitioners. And finally, each of these roles is not independent of each other. They must be integrated in order to accomplish the goal of increasing our professional knowledge and improving the effectiveness of interventions for our clients. What we do know is that knowledge is essential to our profession and survival as social workers and social work practitioners. As mentioned before, our knowledge is obtained from authority, tradition, professional experience, personal beliefs, intuition, as well as findings derived from other research studies that use the scientific method. Our profession is rooted in our credibility. Research findings do not always guarantee public acceptance. Lack of research will erode our credibility with our clients. This chapter explored the place of research in social work and advocated that our practices must be based on quality research findings derived from the scientific method. So to be a lifelong learner, join the NASW. Choose a conference that is relevant to your practice area and make a commitment to attend every year. Join a listserv dedicated to critiquing knowledge in your area of practice. Join your local library. Spend at least one day a month in a professional development reading about the latest research in your area. There are more ways of finding lifelong learning on page 30. In this chapter, in the next chapter we will discuss how to formulate research questions that can be answered using the scientific method that was covered in chapter 1.